The grand piano was the heart of the Davenport mansion, a polished black beast of ebony and ivory that slumbered under the cathedral ceiling of the main hall. It wasn't an instrument so much as a monument to the family's wealth and supposed culture. It was to be looked at, admired, but rarely touched, and never by the likes of Ilara. Ilara, whose hands, calloused from scrubbing floors and polishing silver, were deemed unworthy of its pristine keys. She moved through the opulent rooms like a ghost, a silent witness to a world of glittering superficiality. Her uniform, a simple gray dress, was a stark contrast to the silks and jewels worn by Mrs. Beatrice Davenport and her daughter Clarissa. They saw her not as a person, but as a function, a pair of hands to carry out their will. Beatrice, a woman whose spine seemed to have been forged from ice, once saw Ilara gazing at the piano with a wistful longing. "That," she had said, her voice dripping with condescension, "is worth more than every person you will ever know combined. See that you remember that. Dust it, but do not breathe on it too heavily." The memory was a small, sharp stone in Ilara's shoe, a constant reminder of her place. But they didn't know her secret. They didn't know that in the quiet hours after the great house fell silent, the music lived not in the untouched piano, but inside her. It was a symphony in her soul, a legacy from a mother she barely remembered, a woman who had played in humble church halls with a grace that could make angels weep. If you believe that true talent cannot be silenced, and that the human spirit can triumph over any circumstance, then be sure to subscribe and follow our channel for more stories that will move your heart. The days leading up to the annual Davenport Charity Gala were a storm of frantic activity and frayed nerves. It was the pinnacle of the social season, an event where Beatrice Davenport showcased her fortune and influence. This year, a celebrated concert pianist, a maestro named Julian Croft, was scheduled to perform, a fact Beatrice announced at every opportunity. Clarissa, who had endured years of expensive and largely fruitless piano lessons, was also set to play a short prelude. She would practice for hours, her playing a clumsy, soulless thumping that echoed through the marble halls, a percussive assault on the ears that made Ilara's teeth ache. Clarissa would often emerge from these sessions, flushed with unearned pride, and find some small, insignificant fault with Ilara's work. "The silver isn't gleaming, it's merely shining," she'd complain, flicking a dismissive hand. "Do it again." Ilara would simply nod, her face a placid mask, and endure. Her silence was mistaken for subservience, her humility for a lack of spirit. They had no idea that her silence was a fortress, protecting a world they could never comprehend. In that world, Clarissa's clumsy rendition of a Chopin waltz was a child's scribble next to a masterpiece. Ilara could hear the music as it was, meant to be played, each note a drop of pure color in a cascading river of sound. She could feel the composer's heartbreak, his joy, his fury, all in the phantom notes that danced in her mind. The one person who saw a flicker of the light within Ilara was Mr. Alistair Finch, the elderly retired musicologist who lived in the modest guest house on the estate. He was a gentleman with eyes that had seen and heard a lifetime of beauty, and they missed very little. One evening, as he took his constitutional walk through the gardens, he heard something faint, almost ethereal, carried on the breeze from the open window of the servants' quarters. It was a humming, a melody so achingly beautiful and complex it stopped him in his tracks. It was a forgotten sonata by a little-known composer, a piece he himself had only heard once on a dusty old recording. He followed the sound and saw Ilara, sitting on the steps of her small room, staring into the twilight, her voice the source of the sublime music. He didn't approach her then, but a seed of curiosity was planted. And truth has a power all its own. The time came for Clarissa's performance. With a flourish, she sat at the grand piano. A polite, strained silence fell over the room. What followed was a massacre of a Mozart sonata. Notes were missed. The tempo was uneven, and the entire performance was imbued with a technical stiffness that was devoid of any emotion. It was the sound of money, not music. The applause at the end was dutiful, lukewarm. Clarissa, however, beamed, as if she had just performed at Carnegie Hall, curtsying deeply to the crowd. Beatrice looked on, her face a mask of maternal pride, oblivious to the barely concealed smirks and exchanged glances among the more musically educated guests. Then came the announcement. A flustered assistant hurried to Beatrice's side, whispering frantically. Beatrice's smile froze, then shattered. Her face went pale. She tapped the microphone, her voice tight with forced composure. "Ladies and gentlemen, a slight delay. It seems Maestro Croft has been unavoidably detained. His car has broken down. Miles from here. We will have an extended intermission." A wave of disappointed murmurs rippled through the hall. The centerpiece of the evening was gone. For Beatrice it was a social catastrophe. The carefully constructed illusion of perfection was crumbling. It was in that moment of chaos and rising panic that Mr. Allister saw his opening. He found Alara by the kitchens, her hands gripping the edge of her empty tray. Her eyes were wide, watching the drama unfold. "Ilara," he said, his voice low and urgent. "This is it. This is the moment." Fear flooded her face. "No, I can't. They'll destroy me." He gently took her hand. "They can't destroy what they don't understand. Do you remember what you played for me yesterday? The piece you wrote yourself?" She nodded, her throat tight. He called it The Unseen. "Play that," he said. "Don't play for them. Play for your mother. Play for every person who has ever been overlooked. Play for yourself." He looked toward the stage, toward the magnificent silent piano. "Go on. The truth is waiting." For a heart-stopping moment, Alara remained frozen, a battle raging within her. The years of ingrained servitude, the fear of humiliation, the sting of 100 condescending remarks, they all screamed at her to retreat into the shadows. But then she saw Clarissa whispering to her friends, pointing towards the stage with a scornful laugh, and she saw Beatrice's frantic, panicked expression, a woman terrified not of the lack of music, but of the stain on her reputation. And in that instant something shifted. A quiet fire, long dormant, ignited in her chest. It was the fire of her mother's legacy, of Mr. Allister's belief, of her own stifled soul. With a deep, steadying breath, she set her tray down on a nearby table. She straightened her simple gray uniform, smoothed her apron, and began to walk. She walked out of the shadows and into the light. A hush fell over the room as she moved, not the polite hush for a performer, but a confused, baffled silence. Whispers erupted like wildfire. "Who is that?" "It's the maid." "What on earth is she doing?" Beatrice saw her, and her eyes widened in horror and fury. "Alara, stop this instant! Get back to the kitchens!" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper that carried across the front rows. But Alara didn't stop. She didn't look at Beatrice. She didn't look at anyone. Her gaze was fixed on the piano. She walked up the small steps to the dais and stood before the magnificent instrument. She ran a hand over its polished surface, a gesture of familiarity, of reverence. Then she sat down on the bench. The room was electric with a mixture of shock, derision, and a sliver of morbid curiosity. Clarissa was openly laughing, her face a mask of cruel amusement. Beatrice looked as if she were about to faint from sheer mortification. Alara placed her hands, those calloused, hard-working hands, over the keys. She closed her eyes, shutting out the sea of judgmental faces, the opulent hall, the weight of their expectations. She was back in Mr. Allister's small cottage, safe. She was a child, listening to the echo of her mother's humming. She took one final deep breath, and then she began to play. The first notes were soft, delicate, like raindrops falling on a still pond. They cut through the tense atmosphere, pure and clear. The laughter in the room died in people's throats. The smirks vanished, replaced by frowns of disbelief. This was not the clumsy fumbling they had expected. This was something else. Then the music began to build. A powerful, heartbreaking melody swelled from the piano, a story told without words. It spoke of loneliness in a crowded room, of a silent strength forged in the face of scorn, It was the sound of a caged bird finally taking flight. The music flowed through her, a torrent of emotion unleashed. Her fingers, which had known only the grit of soap and the coldness of polished silver, danced across the keys with a speed and precision that was breathtaking. The music was a storm, rising and falling, weaving intricate patterns of sorrow and hope, of despair and ultimate soaring triumph. The crowd was utterly transfixed. They were no longer seeing a maid in a gray uniform. They were seeing the music. They were seeing a soul laid bare. Faces in the audience were etched with awe. Jaws were slack. A woman in a diamond necklace dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief. A stern-faced businessman stared at the stage, his expression softened by a wonder he hadn't felt since childhood. The camera found Beatrice and Clarissa. Their faces were a canvas of crumbling arrogance. The mockery had been replaced by a pale, sickly shock, a dawning, horrifying understanding of the magnitude of the talent they had dismissed, of the treasure they had used to scrub their floors. The final notes of the piece hung in the air, shimmering, before fading into an absolute, profound silence. No one moved, no one breathed. The only sound was the faint, lingering resonance of the piano. In that silence, Elara opened her eyes, and then a single person began to clap. It was a famous, notoriously harsh music critic standing in the back. The sound was like a stone thrown into a still lake, and then the ripples became a wave, and the wave became a flood. The entire room erupted into a deafening, thunderous ovation. People were on their feet, their applause echoing off the high ceilings, a roar of vindication, of apology, of sheer unadulterated awe. Elara looked out at the sea of faces, not with triumph, but with a quiet, tearful grace. She had not conquered them. She had simply shown them her truth. And it was more beautiful than anything they had ever owned.